Okay, so we are live, and we are live with our last interview of the week. It's been an intensive week, so thank you, John, for being with us today.
Sure, glad to be here.
So for this week has been to talk about communicating sustainability in different fields. With you, John, today we're going to talk about plastic. We want to thank you for actually watching our previous interview. You took part in providing questions to the other speakers, so thank you very much. I also take a chance to thank our previous speakers who took a chance to be with us for the rest of the week. Also Christian, who interviewed the guests for the previous days. So John, you are an international business developer with experience in the chemical and associated industries. You generate, develop, and select, execute marketing programs also to achieve business growth. You're a chemical engineer by education, but you've worked in the US as well in Europe. You're based in Belgium now as well. Yeah, your focus today is going to be about plastic. We talked about this before. You have a really, really unique vision of it. So please go ahead, introduce your presentation and tell us more about it.
Okay, shall I share my screen now?
Yes, surely.
I know something about plastics, but not a whole lot about technology in this sense. Here we go.
Yes.
All right. Let me know if I'm sharing.
It's sharing.
All right. Okay. Full screen. Okay, is that on full screen now?
Yes, we can see it well.
All right, great. Okay, all right. Well, shall I begin? I'll begin with, if I can, with this image here. I took this image almost 2 years ago to the day, in April of 2019, while on vacation in northern Greece. And so this is almost 2 years ago to the day. And it was a walk along the seaside, as you can see. And I was walking on the seaside, and it was, what was going on? What was I thinking? What was going on in my head? Well, I can remember the song by U2, "It's a Beautiful Day," was playing in my head. Not with earbuds, but I have an installed MP3 player in my brain, so I could hear it just playing in my head, enjoying the weather. Being from the United States and from Arkansas, I come from the Bible Belt, so being across the way from the city of Thessaloniki had significance for me because in the New Testament you have the book of Thessalonians written by the Apostle Paul, and so this was also in my head, thinking about these things. And then I come across what you see here before you, this mountain of plastic waste. And all of a sudden the beauty of the blue sky kind of dissipates, the sea breeze, I don't feel it anymore, and what was a beautiful day starts to change. And I look at this and things start to come up in my head. Number one, looking at this plastic waste and knowing something about plastic, I start to take an account of the different types of materials. And I see PET water bottles with polyethylene caps. I see a yellow household industrial chemical bottle, also made of polyethylene. And a little bit further off, you see those big blue containers and that black container. I look at those and I have a memory of 20 years earlier when I was working for Borealis, me and colleagues developing the very polymers that go into making those type of containers. And I have a memory of my colleagues throwing these type of containers off the office building to test their impact resistance. So all this comes to my head. And then also what comes to my head about this time was all these protests taking place. This was the time when Greta Thunberg was really on the TV. There were protests in Brussels going on, all related to climate. And so images of her and these protests flash in my head as well. And then I start to feel, what do I feel? Probably the first emotion is literally anger, a sense of anger, like my day has been violated. My beautiful day has been violated. A sense of sadness, because quite frankly, to some extent, I have something to do with this. And then fortunately after this, a sense of determination right in the moment. You could call it almost an epiphany, where I said to myself, I'm going to try to do what I can to do something about this. And so this is my day. This is what happened 2 years ago. And what I want to talk about today, this whole forum is about communicating sustainability and improving conversations. And what I really want to do is have kind of a conversation today. It starts out one way, but maybe we can have a conversation later on. And I want to have conversations over plastic and climate change, or climate. And one of my goals is the engagement of industry. And you can see me as coming out of industry. I spent most of my career one way or another involved in plastics, and activists. Once again, the image of these activists in my head after walking on the beach. I see this need for engagement. And then lastly, to see how we can reach out to everybody else. So that's kind of what I'm wanting to try to do today. But who am I? I mean, who am I? A little bit about who I am. Well, I as was said, I'm trained as a chemical engineer. I have my degrees from the University of Arkansas. Go Hogs, go Razorbacks. And started my career working for Dow Chemical in the United States, in Texas. At the time, in the late 80s, Dow was the largest polymer producer in the world. And I was working at the largest chemical complex in the world, so I was told. So it was big and big, but you know, as they say, everything is bigger in Texas, including the bellies most of the time. So I was working there and doing polymers R&D, working in a research plant, a pilot plant, developing new technology and new materials to grow the business and the profitability of Dow's polymer business. And I absolutely loved it. It was a chemical engineer's dream to work in that plant. I absolutely loved it. And that's why I talk a little bit about the art of making plastic, and we can talk about that more. I moved, after working for Dow for a number of years, moved from Dow in the US over here to Europe back in the early 1990s. And actually when I moved, I switched countries, I also switched companies and went to work for what later became Borealis. And if you're in the polymer industry, you know Borealis as well. They're one of the largest polymer producers in the world today. Went to work for them, developing technology for them. That's what I did for a number of years, moving from Borealis, from developing process technology to products, to bringing these products to the market, to marketing these products. And I did this for many years for Borealis. And so my little collage here is showing a little bit of my progression. And you see on the right, all the far right, you see these are the plants based on the technology that we developed when we were at Borealis. It's called Borstar Technology. It's one of the largest technology franchise in the polymer business. And me, together with my team members, you see here in our cool calendar pictures, we're working on the development of this technology. And as you see here, me without my shirt on, this is before the tattoos and before I bulked up like I am now. So it was a different time. But I show this because yes, I was developing technology, but I was also just a human, just a guy living on the planet. And as much as I like technology and molecules, it's the interaction of people that's more important for me. So this is a little bit about who I am. Yeah? And my relationship with plastic and climate has changed over the years. It began with what I could best describe as indifference, and now is at a place where I call it determination. And you can see here along the way, distraction, futility, despair, renewal, back to distraction. And recently I talked about anger and sadness coming to determination. So I've had an interesting relationship with plastics over the years. It has not been all just the status quo the whole time. And we can talk about this more if you want. Okay, coming back to this walk on the beach and what keeps ringing in my head, or what kept ringing in my head after that walk, were these protests. And you see here, this is Anuna de Wever. She's called the Greta Thunberg of Belgium, but she's really just the Anuna Wever of Belgium. She's in her own right a climate activist leader. And you can see the emotion, you can see the determination, you can see the signs, and I get it. And so when I read this and I see this and I saw what I saw on the beach, you have my own quote. I give a damn about this as well, and I'm determined to do something about it myself in any way I can. So this is kind of where I'm coming from. And looking at the problem, what do I think the problem is? Well, I think the problem is too much plastic. Duh, right? Too much plastic often made in the wrong way. We can talk about that. Often of the wrong type, and very often ending up in the wrong place. It's obvious to all of us, whether you're in the industry or not, we see this, right? And I'm not going to talk a lot about numbers. This is not a presentation about numbers. Numbers can be overwhelming and can cause us to say, hey, forget it, right? But I do need to bring up a few numbers, not all these, but a few numbers, just to kind of set the scene. First is kind of my journey through the plastics industry. Back in the late 80s when I began, 1989, I was already a couple of years into industry, but you see here in 1989, 100 million metric tons of global plastics production back then. 10 years later in 1999, towards the end of my time at Borealis, it doubled to 200 million. 2019, so during that walk on the beach, almost doubled again to 370 million. And so you see the growth of plastics just continuing on. We can talk about why that is. Zero or less than 1% of all this is bio-based back in 1989 up to 2019. And why is that important? We can talk about that more in a second. Bio-based versus fossil-based. Here's just another representation of this. Another number, well, the estimate for 2035 is that the production of polymers is going to double again to about 640, 650 million. So it just keeps growing. And the question I have is, will it be still less than 1% bio-based, or will that change? Something that I think is interesting to wait and see. Why? Why does it keep on growing? You know, why does it keep on growing? Well, obviously one reason is because we keep on growing, the population. So here's the population growth from 1989 and the projection through 2035. So just more people. Combine that with more people with more money. Global per capita income is increasing. And so you have more people with more money. And so it's not a surprise that the consumption is increasing and plastics are going along with that. Here's just the total plastic that we've produced since the beginning of the production of plastics, essentially. 8.3 billion metric tons of plastics been produced as of 2015, and 6.3 billion ends up as plastic waste. It's unbelievable when you think about it. Of this plastic waste, about 9% of it has been recycled. So there's a lot of work to do. We all know this. Then lastly, this last thing on numbers, 8% of oil production goes to plastics. I thought it would be bigger than that. It's only 8%, but it's still a whole lot. And when we start talking about carbon footprint, you can actually reduce the carbon footprint specifically by 75% kilogram per kilogram when you switch from fossil-based materials to bio-based materials. That's something important. And then one last number. Like I said, we can be overwhelmed, but you know, at the end of the day, all these numbers, I'm going to talk about me and why I'm motivated to do something. And it's just me. What can I do? Well, you know, it's not just me. It's me and you. It's us. And we can work together. And I have some ideas on how we can work together to make some change. You know, we can't change the world, but we can change ourselves and each other. We must engage. Why? Why must we engage? Well, the challenge before us just demands it. It's just too big not to engage. No one person can do this. No one group can do this. It's just practical. We have to engage. We must engage in order to deal with the us versus them problem. Us versus them only makes things worse. You know, if we go to separate camps, industry and activists, nothing's going to really happen that's going to be good. Industry members and activists care the most. We're the most, you know, concerned about this in one way or another, right? The rest of the world, which is much bigger than both of us, is just going on living their own life. You know? Industry, ignoring activists is not an option anymore. Fortunately, the activists are just too darn loud. Thank you for that. We need that. We need that. And also, I must say to the activists with a little sense of humor, burning down the plastic plants is also not an option. It's not realistic, and it's also highly illegal. Now, and I'll tell on you if you burn them down, so don't do it. And also engagement. I think there's a generational component to this. There is because industry tends to be a little bit older and the activists tend to be a little bit younger. Not all, but in general. And we can learn from each other, of course. Here, just a little segue on learning from each other. This comes from a pamphlet when they introduced this new blue bag here in Belgium recently. And I looked at this photo and I chuckled, because if you look at the parent, you can almost see on her face that she's like instructing the child on how to do this, you know. But my experience is that actually the young people know more about this than the adults. And so I just find this kind of humorous. So anyone can learn from anyone else. And the older generation needs to be aware of that, right? Okay, how to engage? We need to find some common ground. I call this pillars of engagement. And actually, I'm just happy to be able to make a Venn diagram. So pillars of engagement that I see that are really important to cultivate some engagement. Number one, good faith, reaching out in good faith, cultivating respect. Number two, science-based, viable. I've been really gratified to hear in all the presentations this week, there's no one that's wanting to reject science. Everyone's talking about science, so we're on the same page. And then lastly, beyond greenwashing, and we'll talk about that. Good faith, cultivating respect. What I mean, take a step and listen. And I'm talking to myself. Listen, John, listen. Take a step and listen. Be skeptical. Yes, skepticism. We love skepticism. Cynical? No, 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 no. Good faith? Yes. Blind faith? No. And trust and verify. This is what we're talking about, what I talk about when I talk about good faith. Overcome the us versus them paradigm. This is, I think, probably the most essential thing when it comes to good faith engagement. The world is trying to rip everyone apart. You see it in politics, you see it in how we handle the pandemic and all this stuff. We need to make sure this doesn't happen when it comes to plastic and climate. And also we need to dispense with stereotypes and caricatures. And I'll give you some examples. Here's some stereotypes and caricatures, right? So if you look at this, you know, you have the Dr. Corporate Evil. Look on the other side, you have the hippies with plastic frisbees. Or you can toss another insult to the other side saying, hey, isn't it past your bedtime? Or virtue signalers. You can come back to the person in industry saying, you aging boomer afraid of change. So we need to deal with this. We need to dispense with these stereotypes and caricatures. Because the moment you stereotype the other or make a caricature, then the conversation's over. It just gets ridiculous ad hominem. We need to both grow beyond this. And I have to say, I've been a victim of and a perpetrator of both of these. I've been guilty and I've been guilty of this and a victim of this. And my guess is everyone has that's been involved. Science-based and viable. Gone are the days when industry could regard itself as the only science-based player. Believe it or not, we used to think that. I attribute this a lot to the education, you know, STEM and STEAM. I think that's what they call it in the US. I don't know, we call it here in Europe. But there's so much education that's really bringing people up to speed on science and technology. Today, many activists know as much as more, if not more, about the science of the matter than the industry experts do. That's a fact. Yeah. So gone are these days where the industry is actually having all the cards when it comes to scientific knowledge. Science is our best tool for discernment. It's part of how we maintain the good faith. It's part of the trust and verify. It's also part of how we avoid greenwashing. Science is our best tool for discernment. And then viable. What I mean by viable is all this is just an academic exercise. Is if we don't want solutions that will work. And working means they need to be economically viable. And so I really applaud the talk from Matthias, Dr. Wilipowski earlier this week when he talked about the circular economy. And then lastly, a comment that I heard and I agree with is the economy is part of the environment, you know, and you don't have to be a capitalist to believe that. It's just a fact. Okay, and then beyond greenwashing. Well, greenwashing, you know, I say no BS. I'm not going to say the word out because, you know, I got to be professional, but no BS. And what is, we all know what greenwashing is, but, kind of my definition, greenwashing is fooling yourself or fooling others or both on matters related to climate sustainability. I have it written here. It can be intentional and it can be unintentional. Yeah. Greenwashing, in my opinion, is failure. It's a failure. Greenwashing is done by companies that have no legitimate case for sustainability concerning their offering. That's my opinion. Most examples of greenwashing come from industry, but activists can also greenwash. Unintentionally, perhaps, but they can also greenwash. Good faith engagement, what I talked about earlier, and good science are antidotes to greenwashing. So I want to go beyond greenwashing. These are the three pillars. And then I'll just real quickly, I'm getting close to closing on this presentation part, but I want to talk, remember the R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. I've added replace and remove, I just wanted to kind of put together a few examples that I see that I think are positive, but would like to have a discussion. On reduction, which we need to have more focus on reduction, in my opinion. I want to talk a little bit about lightweighting. You see it in cases. I saw an advertisement a few days ago, shampoo bottles that are lightweighted. PET water bottles. The PET water bottle has been reduced in weight immensely over the 15 years or so. So reduction in the amount of polymer per application. Good things. And then honeycomb technology, different technologies. I'll give an example of honeycomb where you can take polymers, convert them to little structures that are honeycomb structures that are much lightweight than a solid piece of plastic, and then put this in a layer to make a sandwich panel, and you have a much lighter panel with the same mechanical performance for a given application. So technology of honeycomb is another example of what I call reducing technologies. Reuse. Okay, reusable PET bottles. Okay, we lightweight them when they're one way, but we make them heavy when we want to reuse them. You see this in Germany a lot. Carrier bags. Okay, I mean, my cupboard has a number of carrier bags, plastic bags that I use again and again and again. So reuse. Recycle. This is very much technology related. All kinds of stories and examples of mechanical recycling taking place. We can talk. Chemical recycling or enhanced recycling or monomer recycling, different terms, but it's all chemical, where you take a polymer and actually bring it back to its feedstock state and then reuse it. As long as you can do that by minute, keep the carbon footprint low, it's a good solution. Organic recycling or composting, a very interesting and also a controversial area. Also on recycling, I read an article the other day, Borealis was talking about not pigmenting packaging, so white or clear bottles. Why? Well, because it makes it easier to recycle. Turns out that when you put pigment in it, it confuses the technology, the machines to sort. And then the famous story of the bottle-to-bottle recycling of PET, which is really a success story in recycling. Replace. This is carbon footprint in my view, from fossil-based to bio-based. PLA is a polymer that's a good example of this, where you can reduce the carbon footprint immensely. Non-fossil renewable feedstocks. Neste Chemicals, Neste is really big on this. They're the world leader doing this. And they're like taking cooking oil and converting this to raw material that can be used to make polymers. So it's also non-fossil fuel based, which is critical. And then remove. Cleanup efforts. I have a website here called Waste Free Oceans. I learned about this recently. A gentleman that's been in the plastics industry as long as me was passionate about making a difference, seeing all the plastic crap in the oceans and wanting to do something about it. And so he made this website. I recommend people go and look at this. It's amazing. Valorization, meaning bringing value to this waste so that people see, hey, I need to collect this stuff. Biodegradability, that's a controversial issue. But there are technologies, a polymer called PHA, polyhydroxyalkanoates, that actually biodegrade in seawater, and that they don't biodegrade to microplastics. They biodegrade to carbon, to water, and to biomass. And of course, it's not a solution, but it is something to mitigate plastic waste in the ocean, in my view. So some examples of the R's. And then lastly, I'm going to close by saying there's some good signs. Industry is challenging itself. That's happening. I see it. Innovation is taking place. Value chains are evolving. And I can say from my own experience, the industry today is vastly different than it was 20 years ago. And a balance of industry cooperation and company competition is taking place. So that's healthy. And then this is my last slide, closing questions. This has been one way so far, but I want to ask the activists that are out there that will see this either today or some other time, some questions to you. So you see here, what's your view on the plastic problem? I mean, I want to know what it is. I want to hear, I want to engage, I want to listen. What do you think about the innovations taking place? How do you think that we can work together better? What's your current level of trust? And then lastly, is there some greenwashing in this presentation? If there is, there may very well be, but it is unintentional. I give you my word. So okay, I went a little bit longer than expected, but so this is what I want to talk about.
Thank you very much, John. You can stop sharing your screen. Thank you. Sure. And yeah, it was very interesting. You touched a few slides, but you make quite a bigger argument, which I think is very interesting. So maybe my first question can be a little bit more in terminology. I'm just very interested in that. I think I've asked other speakers about this as well. It is limiting sometimes as someone, as a customer. I'll put myself in the shoes of a customer. So how can an industry better communicate the value of its products when it comes to it is biodegradable or it's compostable? But sometimes people don't really understand the difference of these terms, especially in view of the fact that they might use that as their marketing tool, even without the greenwashing, because what they're doing could be true, or even in view of the fact that sometimes more sustainable options actually are not that good.
Yes, I think the first point I would make is the first step is, and I think the answer today in 2021 is in the main they do, but the first point is industry has got to want to communicate this. In my view, if you go back 30 years, yes, I'm that old. There was a time when, in my opinion, when there was an actual, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, deception taking place. To put it in nicer terms, greenwashing, intentional greenwashing taking place. I mean, there's been a lot of journalism on this recently, going back to the late 80s, early 90s, where there's some speculation that the intent was to confuse with the little circular labels on recycling, I think that may have been taking place in the past. There's a less of this going on today because everything has changed. I mean, it is business. It is good business to promote your sustainability, credibility, and offering. It's good business, and that is what will drive the industry to seek ways to communicate more clearly to the market and to the customer. And then when you look at the market and the customer, I have to say myself, I'm confused. I get confused. Even to this day, I'm confused when I'm sorting sometimes. It takes an effort to understand. It's not so easy. There is no silver bullet to say, okay, here's a stamp. Just know that stamp's on it and you can throw it in this or that and it's okay. It's still complicated. I don't have the answers. I mean, when you look at bio-based, that's also confusing. When I say bio-based, I mean polymers that come from renewable, usually annual renewable resources. But bio-based is not necessarily biodegradable. I used to think that they were one and the same myself, and I come from the industry, right? And so I can't give a simple answer to how to clear up all the lack of clarity, because it is unclear. And Sven the other day with the double nature, great stuff. He was pushing back on complexity, and I get his point. But some things are complex, and the reality is this is complex. Sometimes the complexity is intentional. I think it used to be intentional. I don't think it is today, because companies are really making investments and making innovations that they see as a business to make sure it's communicated clearly in the market. So.
Yeah, I do agree with you with Sven's comment. I appreciated where that thought comes from, the sense that we can simplify something, but it is complex. Like there are some just issues like this one where the conversation is just complex because it could turn technical to a certain extent. So the next question is your impression of the industry mindset. So with the first interview on Monday with Riccardo Parigi, he did work with industries, particularly in communicating their sustainability, even those who were not performing that well, which I thought was very interesting. I know you've watched it, so you sort of have the idea of the conversation we had, but what is your impression of industries who would prefer not to put themselves out there? And I don't mean those who are like, well, we don't want to change our mindset because we're not sustainable. I mean, just in the whole, the era is changing, but what is happening in industries, because exactly they're stereotyped as maybe the bad guys all the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this goes back to when I talked about greenwashing a little bit earlier. It's my view that any industry member, any company in the industry, I'm talking plastics and maybe associated industries at this point in time, should want to communicate their sustainability credentials, provided they have a sustainability offering in the first place. And so I think that the pressure should be on the industry to if they're laggards behind, then maybe they should go away and let the industry leaders that really are embracing sustainability lead the way. And so let's just let natural selection take its course here. So I have a little bit of a harsh view on this, but it's how I see it. And it's because I do believe that there are, no silver bullets, but there are real technologies, real solutions, and there are leaders in the plastics industry that really want to do something about this. They're not the Dr. Corporate Evil stereotype. They really, and when I get to the art of making plastic, they're like me from my early days at Dow. They take pride in being able to make polymers. And to do this in the right way. They want to make things better, so I don't know if that answers your question, but I think those that are not communicating, it could be that they don't have anything good to communicate, but I think my message to them is do some innovation, get something, and then communicate it.
So when we spoke before the interview, you did mention the good values that come with plastic. And I think that you also, the art of plastic could also be part of the answer to this question. But what is the good value of plastic?
Well, for me also, it goes back to when I talked about my relationship with plastics changing over the years, starting out with indifference. But I put in there renewal. And what was that renewal? That was in about 1995, 1996. I was working at Borealis, and I flew into a sales meeting in Milan, Denmark, the headquarters of Lego. And we had our sales meeting at Legoland in Denmark. And we come in, and in the foyer was a field hospital from Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, right? And we were like, what in the world is this? And well, what it was about, the CEO, the first CEO of Borealis, Juha Rantanen, had the idea to partner with MSF. And why? Because he was wanting to show both to us in the company and also to the outside world, of course, the value of plastics. And MSF was standing shoulder to shoulder with Borealis, saying if we didn't have disposable syringes in the field, a lot more people would die or get infection. If we didn't have plastic packaging, a lot of stuff would go wrong. If we didn't have plastic in medical devices, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was a point of showing the value of plastics. Prior to that renewal, I was actually in a state of what I would call despair. I was going through a point in my life where it's like, all this work, all this education, all this technology is going into just the plastic trash that's floating on the side of the road. So I had this kind of existential moment of despair that fortunately that evening flying into Legoland and seeing that hospital, field hospital, turned it around. I said, you know what I'm doing helps. What I'm doing does help. And yes, there's a problem with plastic on the side of the road, but there's also a good thing. Now, I have to add to this. today, 2021, and go back to 1989. So all through my whole career, anytime you push the industry to defend plastics, you're always going to get this as the preamble and the answer, the value of plastics. It happened in 1989 when there was this first push to try to, the plastic was under pressure. And that's how they countered by just talking about all the good of plastic. And it was used to almost deflect against the problems. And I don't want to do that. And I know UHID wasn't doing that either. And today, I don't think the industry is doing that in the main. Because the industry knows that the activists in the outside world is just too smart, if for no other reason, to be fooled. And we no longer want to fool ourselves either. So it's a matter of yeah. So this is how I see, part of the value of plastic, but it needs to be used in the right plastic in the right application, and it needs to be handled in the right way. And the industry is really changing, as I said. 25 years ago, developing polymers at Borealis and earlier at Dow, there was no one word among researchers and market developers and technical service people about end of life or what do you do with this stuff after it's used. We didn't even think about it, never mind any advertisements. We never did think about it. Now there are departments and strategies and huge amounts of investments. So there's this new departments and disciplines within the plastics industry to really do this, and I think that's this is not going to solve the problems because plastics keeps on growing anyway, but it is helping to mitigate the situation in my view.
Yes, and what you said before actually makes me smile for one reason. I recently met with a doctor who quite experienced surgeon, and he actually believes that you don't need that much plastic in Africa because it doesn't really matter. We are just making a big deal in developed countries about like infections or stuff like that. So it sort of makes me smile because I'm like, I'm not a doctor here, but I'm sure there could be some issues. But it's which comes to maybe also my next question. It is very interesting that if you're an expert, then you should know what best to say. You suppose as someone listening that, okay, you're an expert, I trust you of what you say. But then again, you have experts saying things that could go contradict other experts. So it's always very interesting about the conversation that are happening and who should I trust and who should I not. Which then brings to you, we talked about this because you made a reference to pH equals 0 in your presentation. And I think it relates a little bit to the comment I was making. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this also goes back kind of this story sets the tone of how I began my approach to the whole issue of activism. It was when I was at university, sitting in a class, and one of my chemical engineering professors got up and told this story. He had been called in sometime before as an expert witness on a case in the St. Louis area, and the case was brought by an environmental group against a chemical complex. And the chemical complex was charged with discharging processed water into a tributary to the Mississippi River, which in itself is legal. But locally, it was raising the pH, and this was affecting the environment, so increasing the pH. And this professor of mine got up and was telling this story. And as professors, they kind of toggle between lecturing and performing, and he was performing here, saying, yeah, the attorney got up and he said, pounding on the desk, we will not stop until we get the pH down to 0. And then there was this pause in the room. We're all chemical engineers and know something about chemistry. Well, trust me, you don't want the pH to go to 0. That's just total acidic, yeah. And his whole point, the whole atmosphere that's created is like, activists don't know what they're talking about. It was propagating a stereotype, and it landed in my head. And you combine that with a little bit of intellectual arrogance because we're chemical engineers, we think we know a lot. And then it's like, yeah, our heads get really big and think, yeah, we know what we're talking about. You complain you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know science. And that's what I mean by that. It's a caricature, and it set the tone for me for quite some time. I think fortunately, like I said earlier, the activists are in many cases better scientists than the scientists within the industry. So times have changed, but also mindsets have changed. So that's what I meant by that story, this zero pH. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me smile because that's I think an issue sometimes with quite a few, whether it's industries or people, just sort of making statements but not really knowing where they come from. So maybe we can now talk about activists. You mentioned activists a lot, and what more would you like to see from activists, or what even improvements? Because I'm going to ask you the question about what improvements you would like to see from the industry side. But I was sort of also wondering about your opinion about activists, because it has been in previous interviews we've had, even on our platform, the fact that activists, it's quite because it's a cool term, people are also misusing it quite a few times. So before you answer that question, I could ask you, what do you mean by activist? Yeah,
I mean, indeed, like, it's a cool term. It's cool to be an activist. Yeah, and I like to be cool, even though I'm an old man. So I get it, and I reference also virtue signaling. This is there's a certain virtue signaling taking place with activism as well. But I think that in the main, those who are activists, and I'll try to define in a minute, are sincere and serious. An activist is someone that simply is extremely, let's say, or passionately concerned about the state of affairs in the environment, be it plastic or be it other elements. And an activist, a true activist, for lack of a better way of putting it, is also endeavoring to educate himself or herself, so that the activist herself or himself does not become a caricature. That does not fall into the trap of us versus them. We've seen so much of that, as I said, in the realm of politics, in other areas of the day. When it comes to climate, when it comes to the plastic waste concern, if we have this here, it's just going to make it much more difficult to move forward. And so for me, an activist is committed, is passionate, and is endeavoring to be sincere and educate himself or herself scientifically, economically, perhaps, but coming with the facts, and not just coming with a sign, but then saying I want the pH down to 0. I'm falling into caricature here too. But there is some of that still takes place. But in the main, activism today, at least what I've seen, is very well educated, well informed, knows what the hell it's doing. So does that answer the question?
Oh. It does answer the question. Yeah. So what improvements would you like to see there? Also in the relationship, because we talked about the us versus them. However, even activists now are going and becoming the bad guys or the bad girls, because they're, of course, they're as you ironically sort of mentioned, like, don't burn anything down, because it's not the way to go. And of course, activists are not all doing that, but where would you like to see the improvement there, considering that now both groups are becoming the annoying ones that the others are not really listening to anymore?
Well, what I would say this is it should be implied in what I talked about a little bit earlier, but what I would say is this: go out on the streets, protest, yell, scream, put up the signs. We need this. The world needs this. So continue that. Don't stop doing that. It's very important. And stop, reach out, listen, in good faith, engage, and seek calm discussions about the matter. It's important to yell. It's important to really make yourself known, and to move the ball forward. It's important to sit down and to talk. The good news is I think that's pretty much going on. I'm rather optimistic about this. I think my comment about burning down the chemical plants is a joke. I don't see this
Of
happening.
course.
I don't.
Of course. Yeah.
No, I see. Once again, I'm optimistic and see a high level of awareness, education, and savvy when it comes to activism today. And I think part of the definition of activism is using your what we call in the U.S. your freedom of speech to protest. And that's good. It's part of what's needed in society to wake people up and to wake sometimes industries up and what Finland called vested interests, to get the attention of vested interests, and I think it's a good thing. So,
yeah. What if industries said about this, that their own business or the economy of a country is the vested interest, so the environment is included, but the rest of the conversation is not necessary? What would you say to that?
Can you say that in another way? I didn't quite understand. Sorry.
Sure. So I maybe it comes with my reasoning behind this. So I do agree that the interest of the overall comes with taking care of what's around us, and industries and activists should do that as well. But what if an industry thought that their own interest, because it's an economy of a country also going forward, does not necessarily include every other conversation possibly? So wouldn't it be misinterpreted in that sense from the industries, I mean, as well as maybe the activist? Who defines which are the main interest?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. That's on the one hand, you can say that, what is the squeaky wheel gets the grease is a cliche from the U.S., but sometimes that's unfortunate, because just because you're the loudest doesn't mean you should have the most attention. I think it's a dialectic process, and I go back to a little bit of these three pillars. I think it should not be our interests are the ones that are pursued versus not yours. It has to be a dialectic process where we come together and find common interests, and it's just not acceptable in my view that you would have industry saying, hey, butt out. It's just not acceptable, and I don't think it's happening. I do see that, and you go to some economies in the world where you have more of a command economy, let's say, from government, and this may be more difficult to achieve. Fortunately, we live in the West in this sense, and for all of our challenges and things that we need to work on, I think we should not underestimate the value of the free society that we actually do live in. We can make change, and so it's just not acceptable for one interest group to say, hey, no, our interests are what are important and not yours. We just cannot let that be. It's not democracy, let's say. It's not healthy in a free society to be like that. I don't know if I answered your question there, but
you sort of did, and maybe you can develop with my next question. So what would you say to those who feel powerless? Because I just wonder about the feelings of you saying this. I really agree with what you're saying, but then I sort of put myself in the position of it's the two of us, our listeners, the whole world can make a change, but then pressure is always a good question of where can you put pressure? Who does put pressure? Who is the watchdog of the government or the industries or even the activists themselves, or even the citizens or so on? So what would you say to people who feel powerless?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've myself have at times felt powerless. So number one, I can relate to that, and it's just part of being a human. Sometimes I think we all go through that, right? Saying, what can I do? And this is, I like to say, I can't change the world, but I can change me, so start with yourself and just start small steps and say, well, constant focus, at least at some stage, focus on what you can change. You can change yourself, do little things here and there. For me, as much as I talk about my concern about plastic these days, I've been the world's worst when it comes to sorting plastic over the years, throwing so much plastic in the wrong place, and so for me, feeling powerless about the big problems, I say, well, I can begin by doing what's right in front of me. That's number one. And number two, I would not underestimate, and this is where I also agree with Finn, the power of organization and the power of the vote in government. There's a lot of very, very good work and also challenging taking place. If you look at the EU towards the industry, the Single-Use Plastics Directive, it's really tough. It's really tough. And why is it? It's meaning it's tough for the industry to see. Okay, how do we adjust? It's not easy. It's not like the industry was able to pay off the EU to get them to make that go light. It's not easy. So I would say, feel powerless, and what can one person do? But there is organization, and believe it or not, there are really lots of examples where the government is actually working. I know it's not cool to say that the government ever works, but believe it or not, sometimes it does. So I would be a little bit more optimistic about that. So begin with yourself, work on what's right in front of you, but also have a little bit of trust, but verify that organization and engaging in society with government and so on actually can cause changes to occur that are in line with what you think is important.
Which I believe also opens to so many other conversations that we could have. We could spend hours on this, because I define myself a little bit of a skeptical. So I do find that frequently industries, you can have the conversation, but then again, what if they outsource? Like I have 1,000 more questions too, but yeah. I think we will reserve these last 10 minutes to a question in the comments. Okay. So it's actually Mateus. He's watching. Hi, Mateus. Good to watch. So he says, great insights from John. It seems as important to differentiate based on facts when it comes to sustainability of plastics. Definitely greenwashing is making it harder to trust those facts, especially for non-scientific stakeholders. And he asked, who should engage in a dialogue to regain the trust and drive a common pathway towards sustainable plastics effectively?
That's a good question. I think, okay, I sound like a broken record, so to speak, but I think it's, well, to some extent, we talk about what can one person do. I have to say here, to some extent, it's someone like me, someone who comes out of the industry that is also interested and passionate about this, combined with the activists and other stakeholders. But it has to come from us. There's no outside entity that's really going to do this. We need to do this to a large extent ourselves. For me. Why I ended my presentation with questions to the activists is because I think it's if we have just one-off discussions, then that's not very helpful either. For me, what I'd like to see coming out of this discussion today, is questions coming back to, if you will, me or us, or if not you or me or us, then someone's local. Maybe the engineer down the street or something like this where they live, but where they begin to engage. I think the more engagement that you have with people that are within the industry, yes, leaders at the top, but also, mid-level engineers and technicians and plants and so on, with those who are not, if you will, in the industry, but are, I keep on using the word activists, then building these networks of communication is I think what is essential to move the ball forward. Did that answer the question?
It did answer it for me. It did, and it also again opens a new chapter about trust. Trust can be quite critical. It can be delicate. Research have shown that the reason why citizens have not been acting the way they can, like voting and so on, is because there's little trust in the government or industries or other stakeholders of the sort. So, John, I think we're coming to the end of our 1 hour interview. Do you have any other comments for our listeners before I close this?
Well, yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, please look at this video when it's posted online, because then you'll see it. And then pause when you get to the last questions on saying we must keep engaging and some questions. Look at these questions and then look at my email and send them to me. Let's continue this dialogue. And if not to me, find someone else that you consider coming from the industry and engage. Let's endeavor to start and keep a conversation going, you know, based on these three pillars of mutual respect and good faith engagement, based on being science-based and looking for viable solutions, and then lastly, moving beyond BS, moving beyond greenwashing, that's what I would basically like to say.
Thank you very much, John, for the interview today. I think you provided a very good conclusion to this week. It has given also call to action to our listeners, which I thank, because they've, for those who followed us the whole week, you can find the other episodes on YouTube as well. And they can be shared, of course, on our social media. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And yes, we agree with you, John. I mean, that's one of the missions of Rethinking Climate, trying to make as much of the conversation not only true, but honest as well, where it comes from and who is it for.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's one last thing, I didn't emphasize this enough. One last thing, and that is, I made a point in my presentation, and that is because there's the industry members, there's activists, like I don't know if you consider yourself an activist, but an activist, yeah. And then
I have my own vision of activism, because I'm in a bit of a crucial point, because I thought, well, if I care about the environment, do I have to be an activist, or do I just care of my own home? Sort of, I defined myself an environmental activist for 15 years now, and then suddenly last year I was like, wait a minute, I don't know.
Yeah, well, but what I would say is this: there are those that are really tuned into the challenge and the problem. I argue that the industry is very much tuned in these days, and of course the activists are tuned in. And then there's the rest of the world, and that's much bigger. And we've got to find a way to work together. Because, you know, maybe by working together, we will find a way to make it where it is easy for just a person that's not engaged to say, I can do this with this plastic, recycle. Maybe we can get to that clarity and communication.
Definitely.
But we're not there. And I think that the best way to get there is by those who are engaged, the activists in the industry, to find a way to work together is the best way to make this happen.
I agree. And that's also, I think, one mission that the Ministry of the Ecological Transition in Italy has been trying to do that. I mean, our this long week of interviews, it's part of the All for Climate agenda of the Italian Ministry of the Ecological Transition, in view of the pre-COP and in view of the COP26, which hopefully is going to be really the turnout of this year. And it's really going to bring forward to many of the questions we've raised also this week, which I think on carbon and so on. So yes, I think this is a really great conclusion, John. Thank you very much for your time. I want to thank also the team of Rethinking Climate that helped in the backstage, Chris and Julia and Amy. So thank you very much. Thank you to our listeners. And I wish you a great end of the weekend. Thank you, John, again.
Ciao.